Welcome to part 3 of this long form blog series, which I have created based on a book chapter that I wrote with Dr. Hevin Gwilym from the University of Bangor. And we wrote this book chapter, as I've said in previous videos, for colleagues Lee Gregory and Steve Ifrati for their book that they edited called Diversity and Welfare Provision. So this chapter that I'm discussing here in these blog series is called Neoliberalism, Division, Austerity and Precarity and Hunger in the UK. And you can find a link to this book and to this chapter in the description below and the discussion in the blog below. So what we're going to be looking at in this blog today is following on from the two previous blogs that are published on this chapter. We're going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of austerity and how the David Cameron ministry, the coalition government from 2010, 2015 and onwards, how they implemented austerity based on previous arguments from the Thatcher government and the Major government and the Blair government before them around neoliberalism. And they took that same idea of neoliberalism. And I think, as we discussed in our chapter, what we think is that they hyped neoliberalism up. They really ramped up the power of neoliberalism and made people feel far more insecure, far more precarious than they ever have done previously. So as you'll find from this blog below, here I discuss the implementation of austerity in the UK. And I talk about how this came about post-Thatcher. And we talk about the story so far and how austerity has impacted mostly the 5 areas of beverage, following on from the beverage welfare consensus. You'll see I've got another blog post on this and another video around the beverage welfare consensus. Post-war work that beverage did to really solidify the idea of social insurance and allied services and how we have a social security system in the UK. And I talk about the dismantling of this. And in this blog series and in this chapter here, we take further this argument around the dismantling of really social security that we know and how that has been transformed over to the idea of welfare at a much reduced, far residualized position. And that happens, as I discuss here below, through this process of neoliberalism and austerity and what that means for people's awareness of their social class as well, and what that means for people's perceptions of food insecurity and how they access enough food to be able to survive. So on that idea, I talk you through some of my PhD findings as well about the rise of food banks and food insecurity and food charity, mostly through food banks. But as you'll see from the blog below, there's access to one of the data findings from my PhD where I've mapped the location of every food bank across Wales. So please do go and have a look at that, because in that bit I talk about how people then access these food banks and what that means for their feelings of that sense of security that seems to have disappeared. So later on in the blog, I also talk about a theoretical framework. As I've discussed before, the theoretical framework that we used in this chapter was to look at our writing and our evidence through a Bordeusian lens, talking about habitus, talking about economic capital, social capital, cultural capital, and how that fits into people's awareness of their class and class structures in general. We also look at this through the lens of Guy Standing's work on the precariat as well, and how modern neoliberal times makes people feel far more precarious than they've ever done before. We talk about funding of the NHS and how, waiting times have started to rise, and we talk about the rise of poverty as well. Thanks very much for listening.